Okay, hello everybody. Bob Bauer of AFI. We gave everybody another minute or so to come on, but and folks are coming in rapidly right now, but I don't want to punish the folks who are here by 1 o'clock. So welcome to AFI's webinar today. Going to be getting the latest information on the tariff situation. And it's sort of a precursor of information that you can also get, as you see on here, the AFI convention's April 24th to 26th this year in Fort Lauderdale. And I really encourage you to consider taking a look at that. And one thing to note, the getting the deal on the hotel room is about another 2 weeks to get the discounted rate. So you want to take a look at that. As you see, we have an expert on AI. That's Severin Sorensen, whose picture's down the bottom. And he is presented to, he's been hired, we didn't know it until after we had hooked up with him, but by an AFI member who raved about the information that he gave. And then also one of our board of directors members had participated in a seminar I did. So not only that part is great, but we're also going to dive even deeper into tariffs and trade issues and the like with a panel discussion that we're going to have at the convention, including a colleague of today's speaker, and then 3 others, and then there'll be a Q&A afterwards. So that one will be, like I said, going a deep dive on supply chain issues, tariff and trade, regulatory, and the like. And when AFI does something, it's directed to you. It's not a broad, okay, this is what might happen in the food industry. No, it's to food imports, and it's the only place you can get that. So we strongly recommend you take a look at it. I know it's going to be well worth your time. Speaking of well worth the time, again, welcome to today's webinar. Pleased to welcome our speaker as well. Some of you likely have interacted with Ned Steiner over the years. He's done a lot of work for AFI, particularly on the miscellaneous tariff bill work that we do. So Ned is Senior Director of International Trade and Government Relations for Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg. And he has more than 2 decades of experience in the fields of public policy and international development. And as I mentioned, he's done, his clients include not only private companies, but associations in particular, a lot of experience at AFI, and even some foreign governments and the like. And we are joined on the call. I see Jerry Horn from Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg coming to hear what Ned has to say as well. Many of you know Jerry for all his work with AFI over the years, so want to welcome Jerry as well. And I used to see Ned all the time. I don't think I've seen him since about the pandemic. And it just happened to be I was walking through Union Station in Washington, D.C., and I hear my name called, and it was Ned. And I don't think we've seen each other since, so it'd be good to kind of be with him today. So with that, we are going to turn things over to Ned, and he'll share his screen and go through the presentation for you.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be with AFI again and to see you and to talk with you all about what's going on in the world of tariffs and trade. I'm going to now try to share my screen. Hopefully that works. The latest on the tariff situation. This is going to be very high level to try to give people a flavor of everything that's going on, maybe with a little bit more detail than you're hearing in the press. But also curious to hear from you folks. And so if you have questions, please include those in the chat. And if we can't get to them during the presentation, then we can follow up afterwards. So we have a disclaimer. And this is really because things are changing so quickly. I wouldn't want you to go out and say, well, Ned said that this is happening because there have been a couple of occasions in the last week or so where um, I gave an update on the situation, and when I finished my presentation, um, it it was different. So anyway, I want to make sure that everybody can see the presentation. Where are we? Does that look good, Bob?
Beautiful. Yeah, we can see it. Good. Thanks, man.
Okay, terrific. So there's a real litany of tariffs that are in place, although sometimes it's hard to know what is actually in place and what has been threatened. But we're at a point now where we do have a number of tariffs that are in place. You've got the old standby, the China Section 301. Those are still in place, either at 25% or 7.5%. There are a few exclusions still left over, some 300 some on exclusions, but those are set to expire May 31st, and they'll expire unless something else happens. There were increases during the previous administration, the Biden administration, increases on several tariff lines, just to make note of that. And now recently, we've got the IEEPA. Those are emergency tariffs. Started off with the 10%, and now they've gone up another 10%. And so we're looking at 20%, no exclusions. Canada, we have the IEEPA tariffs on non-USMCA products. It's important to note that, I've seen in the press that Trump was threatening tariffs, but now has pulled back on that threat. Well, in actual fact, still about 50% of goods from Mexico are USMCA products, and the rest are now subject to this IEEPA tariffs. Similarly, Canada, it's something even less, or 38% or so are USMCA products. So if you're not qualified for USMCA, you are still paying that 25% tariff. And then, of course, we have the steel and aluminum. We're not going to talk too much about that, just so that you are aware of, the environment. And there are countries, as we'll see, that are retaliating against those increases in steel and aluminum. And now the U.S. is poised to retaliate against those retaliations. So it's just important to understand the context. You will recall when the president took office on January 20th, he posted a memo on the White House website of all of the different areas that he wanted his department heads, agency heads to look into and to report back to him by April 1st or 2nd. He wanted them to report back to him with recommendations on what to do to address these various issues. And it's funny, I was writing a memo the other day, and I was referencing this memo, and I think it was February 20th when I was writing the memo, and I said, since it's been and I had to take a pause, but before I said month, it was so unbelievable that it had only been a month and everything had happened. But it's only been a little over a month since this memo came out, and now we are poised to see these recommendations. Now, he has said that the president has said that he wants to enact certain provisions on the 2nd of April, the day after he gets these recommendations. Might take a little longer to put things into place. He might maybe make public those recommendations, but we don't quite frankly know what he's going to do on April the 2nd, but he is supposed to get these reports back. Just another way of looking at it, thinking about it, with what is the mechanism? And that's very important, actually, because with IEEPA, for example, those are emergency tariffs and they're based on this declaration of an emergency with Canada and Mexico. It's about immigration and it's about fentanyl. With China, it's about fentanyl. So the question is, A, how long can this emergency be still an emergency? Um, and can this emergency be extended to other countries? I think, frankly, my point of view is that there are limitations to what the president can call an emergency, and therefore what he can use the emergency IEEPA tariffs um, on what problems he can use that to address those problems. You see there, we've got section 232 there, the second box, and in section 301. Those are tools that the president has used before. And so they're kind of old, reliable, they have run the traps on those authorities. They feel much more comfortable with those authorities. I would anticipate that they would use those authorities as much, if not more, to address some of the supposedly unfair trade relations that the U.S. has with other countries. So we also have this tariff action scorecard just to kind of put things in stark relief. China, pedal to the metal, as you see, it's implemented and may even go higher than 20% with that IEEPA tariff. Canada, Mexico, that also might be escalated and more products covered by 25%. We're supposed to hear something on that magic April 2nd date. Steel and aluminum we talked about before. Reciprocal tariffs, again, the president has said that he's going to act on April 2nd. April 2nd seems to be that key date where a lot of these actions are going to be taken. Okay, so a review of the China IEEPA tariffs, 20% now ad valorem, including Hong Kong. They're interestingly, the Section 321 de minimis is still available for products from China. Now, this means products that don't have other PGA participating government agency requirements. But one can imagine that a lot of folks are using de minimis given the additional 20, if not 45% tariff that they might be facing. No duty drawback is allowed for IEEPA, very few exemptions. And now the FTZ provision is essentially passed, but there was a provision for goods that were on the water. So it's important to note that these tariffs are cumulative. So if you're paying 301, you're also paying IEEPA, you're also paying 232 if steel and aluminum applies. And as I said at the outset, the exclusions that do remain are set to expire on May 31st. China has retaliated on coal and LNG products, and these became effective February 10th. Also, some non-tariff actions related to entities lists and export restrictions, and we'll see this with other countries. And so then it's a question of how does the U.S. respond? Does the U.S. respond in kind with other non-tariff actions, or does the U.S. Trump seems to be very comfortable with using tariffs to respond to non-trade or non-tariff issues like immigration and fentanyl. And so there's some concern that the U.S. will respond to these retaliations not in kind, but by increasing tariffs. There was a second round of retaliation by China, this time on chicken, wheat, corn. That became effective March 10th. Also sorghum, soybeans, really targeting certain U.S. heartland products. Um, and that is often what countries do. It's sort of traditional, is that um, tariffs will be imposed on key industries. So, for example, when you had Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House and Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader, you would see tariffs on wine and tariffs on bourbon. Uh, the idea would be to sort of hit hard those members who those key leader members. And so here we're seeing a lot of heartland products being targeted. So now talking about Canada and Mexico, we've got these IEEPA tariffs that are in place. Um, so what's interesting again is that this idea that the tariffs would be suspended, they initially they were suspended, but the second round they were amended, and it's really important to make that distinction. And in fact, the language of the executive order in particular said the goods that entered the U.S. duty free under Note 11, which is the USMCA note, that those would be exempt from the IEEPA tariffs. But there are so many products, and I don't know if this is the case with folks on the line here, but so many products that came in across the border from Canada and Mexico, they were already duty free. They never had to pay tariff. So a lot of companies didn't have their products be qualified as USMCA because it wasn't necessary. Well, now we're seeing that companies are scrambling to get their certificates of origin and everything into place to get to claim USMCA preference, because if they don't, then they'll be subject to that IEEPA tariff. So same story with Mexico. And of course, Canada and Mexico are furiously interacting with the US, negotiating with the US, trying to roll back these tariffs, keep them from expanding. I think there's a fear, well-founded, that this is the beginning and that April 2nd we'll see more tariffs. And Canada and Mexico are very much the target of the president's actions. So looking at, this is just sort of a graph of what I was talking about before. You got about 50% of goods coming from Mexico that are USMCA qualifying. And by that, I mean that USMCA preference is claimed, versus others that aren't using any special program. And in Canada, it's even less, is 38%. So it's deceptive. I think that the general story was that that the administration did not impose tariffs, but it's clear that tariffs have been imposed. It's just on a smaller subsection of trade with Canada and Mexico. Canada has retaliated. In fact, there's it says that there's going to be a list of goods. Well, now we do have the list, and for folks who might be interested, we can certainly get you a link to that. But there are these different. Canada is doing it in these waves. First, March 4th, and then March 25th. Although there's been a back and forth in terms of suspending goods. Now there's been another negotiation, but April 2nd is going to be that key date to see whether or not there will be a continued suspension or if this will go forward. Mexico, similar situation. There has been no formal announcement yet about the Mexico retaliation, although we might see that very soon. Okay, and I'm going to go very quickly through steel and aluminum. I know that that's not of central importance, but just so that you know that these are out there. And it's important because these are global. It's an example of the different approaches that this administration is taking. On the one hand, they're targeting specific countries, Canada, Mexico, using the IEEPA emergency tariff. On the other hand, they're targeting industries, steel and aluminum, and they're using the 232, the national security mechanisms to do that. It's important to note because 232 requires an investigation. So if there's going to be another 232 action, it has to be preceded by an investigation. Similarly with 301. So that gives us a little bit of time to anticipate what's going to happen. But we might see more of these 232 actions or these industry focused actions that apply across the board. These apply to every country. There were these country quantity agreements. Those have now gone away. So again, just highlighting this as an example of the kind of thing that the administration can do and has done. We're seeing now, so in addition to the Canada-Mexico retaliations against IEEPA, the emergency tariffs, we're seeing European Union, Canada, China taking retaliatory measures against the US for the steel and aluminum increases. And as I referenced before, there are more tariffs on the horizon. We've got a Section 301 investigation on China maritime shipbuilding industry. That's significant because that could impact anybody using Chinese flagged vessels or even Chinese made vessels. Section 301 related to the semiconductor industry. There's an investigation on Nicaragua, and Section 232 copper and lumber and timber. So a lot of investigations are out there. Again, these are investigations that they go forward. There's a finding, and then the president, and a recommendation. The president makes a decision on how to respond to that. So a little bit of lead time before we know whether or not the administration is going to pursue action. On the China and maritime, we saw the report that was issued in January. This began under the Biden administration, and there's a comment period that's open until close to the end of this month. And they're proposing these portage fees. Just to give you a sense here, a potential service fee on Chinese maritime transport operators, Chinese built vessels, and orders for Chinese vessels. So this is significant because this could really change the way that shipping is done in the US. You might have a situation, for example, where ships would come to one port of call instead of multiple ports of call to avoid being charged because the charge is based on per entrance. And instead, they would have to come up with some kind of logistics solution inside the US. So we could potentially be seeing shipments building up at ports at New York, New Jersey, at LA, Long Beach. Smaller ports might not be used because they would not be the first port of call for the ship. So maybe whereas a ship might have stopped in New York and then gone on to Norfolk or Savannah or someplace, or Jacksonville or someplace else, maybe they unload everything or they try to unload everything in New York. Anyway, this could be a very disruptive situation at the ports, and we're keeping a close eye on that. I made a reference to reciprocal tariffs on 220. There was a comment period announced regarding reciprocal tariffs. It's being headed by USTR. The main focus of the comment period was to elicit comments from U.S. companies that were having difficulty getting market access into foreign markets, and that will somehow form the basis for these reciprocal tariffs. It's significant because the USTR also said that they wanted to focus particularly on certain G20 countries, including Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, EU, India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Switzerland, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, UK, Vietnam. So one of the reasons I bring that up now is if you are importing from any of these countries, it is important to keep in mind they may be targets for these reciprocal tariffs. So let's say, and this has been something that's been referenced. In fact, I think I have a slide here. Let's say the US has an issue with getting access to agricultural markets in India. And they decide to, the administration decides to put an additional tariff on certain Indian agricultural goods in order to level the playing field and create a reciprocal tariff. Well, that could have an impact on you if you're importing those food products from India. So it's important to note these countries. If a country that you import from is on this list, you might want to go and see if the product that you're importing has been referenced in any of these documents and could be a potential target for reciprocal tariffs. Mentioned the 232 copper. That's an ongoing investigation. Again, the investigation has the report is anticipated for November, so we wouldn't see action on copper or on timber lumber until November, conceivably, although the president has threatened tariffs on timber and lumber on April 2nd. So I don't know if they're going to be tariffs in advance of the investigation finding. He's mentioned that. So it's something to keep in mind. And how would Canada retaliate, and how would the US respond to that retaliation? There's also a renewal / investigation on autos, investigation on digital services taxes. Again, I mention these because it affects the trade relationship between the United States and these countries, and we could see unrelated retaliation or unrelated tariffs, even though it's just dealing with autos. We might all of a sudden see tariffs on food products. When we saw it, traditionally with 301, with the EU beef, for example, the US put tariffs on unrelated products because of the lack of market access that they were getting in terms of US beef into the EU markets. And so it's important to know what countries are kind of in the bullseye. If you import from those countries, you need to be aware of what the more general environment is like. And there are also new 232, that's a national security investigations, sector-wide investigations on pharmaceuticals, on dairy. We've got Canada 250%. That's what the president had threatened. General household goods, energy resources. So that's an overview, and be interested in taking questions if people have questions. And just to note, as I'm sure everybody is aware, that this environment is changing very quickly, and we're trying to do our best to keep people informed about these changes, and would be happy to respond to anybody's questions if they either want to ask now or reach out later.
Yeah, if you have questions, you can either just unmute yourself or put it in the chat and we can uh, answer them that way. Ned, one thing I'll say too is I'm glad you did cover the various actions that are out there, because as you state, the actions that are taken later may not really pertain to the items that are in question now. And the example you gave is good. So, we don't know what's going to happen, and whether or not food could be brought into a dispute that really has nothing to do with food, because it has happened before. While we wait also to see if there's any questions, I'll just address what AFI has been doing. We're just trying to monitor things as closely as possible. We've been in touch with many food industry associations, as well as some more global kind of when it comes to products. And the only ones who are really actively doing anything at this point, besides a wait and see approach, of the ones I've spoken to, was like the Distilled Spirits Council, because imminent threat right there. Otherwise, the general thought is kind of throwing darts at a wall kind of thing, because you don't know what might get targeted. And as a couple people said to me, we're almost afraid that if we make a good argument as to why our stuff shouldn't have a tariff placed on it, because the administration a reason to put a tariff on it, because it knows it'll cause some pain. So, in general, it seems most folks are doing a wait and see. I think I did see a question.
Yeah, I see a question here. Bob, I don't know if you want to read it. I can read it also.
Okay, you can go ahead and read it then.
Yeah, so it says, with reciprocal tariffs, is it likely or possible that the circumstances will become more challenging? I would say yes. I don't think it'll become less challenging. I mean, I guess on the one hand, there's a hope, especially among the president's supporters on the Hill in Congress. There's a hope that the mere threat of reciprocal tariffs will bring people to the table. And people point to, for example, the India, and how Modi and the Indian government has really stepped up their negotiations with the United States. In fact, Commerce Secretary Letnick just said the other day that holistic conversations with India were progressing quickly. And so you could say, well, that the president's threats are leading to these very positive developments with unrelated parties. There was no explicit threat on India, but India saw the tea leaves and decided to start negotiating with the U.S. So on the one hand, there is a possibility for some facilitation, but there's also a great possibility for things getting more challenging, because there could be additional tariffs, there could be additional retaliation, there could be additional escalation, the way that we've seen with the US and China. It says, what about agricultural products that are not grown in the US? Again, it's really a question of how the US is going to go forward. There is some discussion that the US is, after April 2nd, the US is going to go from a blanket approach. You've seen the blanket approach with, say, China, with IEEPA, a blanket approach with Mexico, a blanket approach with Canada. But the reciprocal tariff suggests that maybe it'll be more targeted, or a 301 suggests that it could be more targeted. A 232 suggests it'd be more targeted. So that could be positive, in the sense that if there isn't that trade imbalance with agricultural products, then maybe you're spared the whatever sort of tariff. The challenge is number one, you're on the, okay, is your product directly targeted? If it's not, okay, then maybe you're okay. But what happens when there's a retaliation or a retaliation to the retaliation? You could, as Bob was suggesting, get caught up in it, even though your product was not initially included on that list.
Bob and Ned, this is Paul from Always. How are you? Paul Jecka.
Hi, Paul.
I have a quick comment. Bob was mentioning various associations, and I know that the Cheese Importers Association of America did provide comments within the time frame that ended on the 11th of March. And I know there was many letters written during that comment period by various members of the association, just to give you an idea. But I want to also include that there were certain topics that were not touched upon as a result of fear of exposing a certain niche market or something that they may not be aware of, and there was no reason to raise attention to it. And that's a strategy I see that I hear within Bob's comments as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Paul. And I think that to that point also, companies are afraid of being targeted. Whatever they say, either used as an example. And some, I've talked with some companies where they say, look, we are having some market access issues, but generally it's working, and they don't want to raise an issue. If I was saying, like, there's they need to use a little a patch, and the administration comes in and brings a blowtorch. So it's understandable, I think, given the very broad actions that the administration is taking. There are a lot of people on the Hill that would like to see a more surgical approach, but it's a big question mark as to, will reciprocal tariffs get us there? And they may indeed. It might be a situation where there's a particular industry and the administration is going to target that industry. But as we've said now a couple of times, it's, once you kind of open up the floodgates, you just don't know how much water you're going to get. MTB, our old pal, a miscellaneous tariff bill. I have some thoughts about that. We're a long way away from when MTB was just a sort of a quiet, once every other year, non-controversial provision where we could get our much needed suspensions or reductions. The problem is that it's been caught up in this whole discussion about, well, two things are an issue with the MTB. One is this discussion about China. If there is a renewed MTB, I think Congress would like to somehow exclude non-market economies, or do something to prevent China from using or abusing MTB. And the other thing, frankly, is Congress is trying to figure out a way to make the MTB be more of geared towards inputs, and that obviously is a challenge for AFI. You're not using stuffed olives necessarily as an input. You might use it as an input for pizza, but you're also putting it in jars and selling it, and it's not a manufacturing product, so it's a different, you have to use a different frame for that. And we've had conversations with people in the past about how food products really don't fall under the same, it shouldn't fall under the same considerations as other kinds of manufactured products. I think, Bob, I don't know how you feel about it. I don't know if Congress is there yet. But there's still an interest. There's still an interest in doing an MTB. I don't know if they're anywhere close to getting that done.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and not to mention we're in an environment where the administration is looking for reciprocity. MTB is a one-way unilateral tariff preference, which is not something administration favors generally. That's not to say that it's done. I mean, the Congress is still looking at various trade provisions, including GSP, which is also a unilateral one-way trade preference. And I often hear MTB talked about in the same breath as GSP. So if we see daylight with GSP, say, we might see MTB move as well, but I haven't seen any developments lately, at any rate. Okay, another question here. Sorry, has the administration indicated they will immediately apply the reciprocal tariffs when announced, or will they allow for containers already in transit to enter before applying the new tariffs? That's a good question. The administration has exhibited a sensitivity for goods that are on the water. So, for example, there was a provision in that China IEPA for goods that have been shipped before February 1. There's sort of an acknowledgement of how were you have supposed, how could you have changed your behavior if you had acted before these tariffs went into effect? So we might see some accommodation for goods in transit in terms of applicability of the reciprocal tariffs. Probably would relate to goods on the water, entry into FTZs, things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of associated provision like that.
Yeah, hopefully there would be. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the only time I'm aware of that wasn't the case was in the first Trump administration on the products from the EU. China had tariffs implemented like 2 months before, and just like every other time, goods on the water were exempt, and then all of a sudden, the stuff from the EU didn't matter if it was on the water. And we tried to get something through Congress. Bill got introduced that we were part of a coalition on, and it just didn't move. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, but so it has happened in the past, and with this president, so I'm not sure what'll happen. Yeah.
Yes. I don't think I'm talking out of turn to say that the administration can be unpredictable. And I think, but I would hope that that they would make a provision for that.
Yeah.
I think for the second China IEPA, they didn't, because maybe they thought, okay, well, you should have been, you should have known that this is what we're doing. This is just, part 2 of a policy. And so we're not going to make this provision for you. So
That's a good point, Ned. I think they'll take that same approach anytime there's a possible list out there.
right.
I'm kind of thinking that they're going to go with that kind of approach. Yeah.
Right. So if we see another Canada-Mexico action, maybe they'll say, well, you should have known. If they see a EU action, maybe they'll say, okay, this is the first time we're doing it. Maybe we cut you a little slack. But that is, TBD. What about products that are already paying duties, like tomato pasta from other countries? The new reciprocal tariffs will go on top. That's a good question. Yeah, so what we're imagining, and again, we like to refer this to this as like informed speculation. What we're imagining is that there's the MFN rate, right? The 3.5, 5%, whatever you're paying, 14%, whatever you're paying normally for those goods. And then there'll be an add-on. And that add-on will be some combination of an additional tariff to level the playing field. Let's say the US has a particular issue with market access. You know, Italy charges us 10% for our tomatoes, so we're going to charge Italy 10% for their tomatoes. And not only that, we have to pay a VAT, and Italy subsidizes their tomato growing. So not only are we going to bump it up 10%, but we're going to add another 2% for, for pain and suffering, basically. And then it's a question of, okay, does that mean that now 12% on top of is going to be on top of every product that comes from Italy? Or is it just going to be on the tomatoes to level the playing field on tomatoes? That's a big question mark. We don't know. I mean, I would say to the president, you're interested in reciprocal, you make it on that product, right? You have an issue with that product, you tariff that product. But we do hear things from Lutnick like, it's easier just to do it with everything. It's easier to do across the board. I don't want to go product by product by product. That's too cumbersome. That's too complicated. So I think, frankly, I think the jury is out on that. But our idea is that they would look at this tariff differential, whether it's on a product by product basis or maybe even an average weighted rate. Let's say over all the imports from Italy and the exports from the US exports pay 5% more than Italian imports. And maybe they use that as an average weighted marginal increase. We're still waiting to hear exactly what approach the US is going to take. But I think that there is going to be some element of that reciprocity. There's some key products that the president's going to target. And then he's going to say, and therefore I'm putting tariffs on that product. Or he's going to say, and therefore I'm putting tariffs on everything because this product is unfair. And he could take either approach. And that gets back to our earlier point, Bob, of it may be that narrow reciprocal product by product, or it may be that's the pretext that he goes after everything. So, it's not, we don't have any kind of guarantee that even if your product is completely unrelated to where the quote unquote problem is, it still might be caught up in this, in the whole tariff action. Mi dispiace.
Any other questions for now? Again, you can either just unmute yourself and fire away or put it in the chat box.
A lot of good questions.
Yeah.
A lot of good questions. And, just to let you know, I've been talking a lot with Congress, a lot with members, a lot with staff, and they do really appreciate hearing from U.S. businesses, letting them know what's happening on the ground in terms of the effects of tariffs, their people's concerns about what the potential effects might be. And so I would really encourage you to reach out to your members of Congress, either through AFI or individually as a company. And if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to discuss that more with you on an individual company basis as well.
That's a good point, Ned. Yeah, and we're with that April 2nd timeframe coming up, I think we're going to get a lot more news, and I think our actions will be a little more clearly defined. So you may hear from us suggesting that you're right as well. And then it's always a good idea to copy AFI when you do reach out to your members of Congress so that we're aware and can either follow up and or if we know of other AFI members or other importers in that area, ask them to hit up the members of Congress too. So if you keep us in the loop, that's great. Um, so, um, you heard that April 2nd, a lot of announcements could make, and it won't necessarily all happen right then. So that the timing of the AFI convention at the end of the month should be pretty good. We should have a lot of decent, very key updates on what's going on. As I mentioned, one of Ned's colleagues, Deb Stern's going to be one of the panel members, and we're going to spend almost a whole morning just on these type of issues. So
Yeah, Deb's terrific.
yeah, she is. Those who've been to the AFI convention before have seen Deb in action, and she's always right on the money and all. So so with that, I'll thank Ned again for his time and expertise today. It's always appreciated. And I know that we'll be in touch a lot probably over the next few months.
Thanks so much, Bob. Thanks to everybody at AFI, and I look forward to being in touch with you.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good day.